The night after I overheard their plan, I sat in my room with the lights off, staring at the ceiling, my mind sharper than it had been in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt awake, alive, as though their cruelty had reignited. A fire inside me that I thought had burned out long ago. They wanted me gone, discarded, erased, but I was going to show them that I was not as powerless as they believed. I opened the drawer of my old oak dresser, the one piece of furniture I had insisted on bringing into their home, and pulled out a worn leather folder. Inside were documents, bank statements, property deeds, and old insurance papers that had been sitting untouched for years. Daniel and Chelsea thought I had nothing, that I lived entirely dependent on their charity, but they had no idea of the life I had built before they were even born. Back when my husband was alive, we had invested quietly, cautiously, in small properties scattered across town. Some were sold, some had grown in value, and though I had never flaunted my money, I had kept it safe, hidden away, for emergencies, for moments just like this one. My husband always told me, never put all your eggs in one basket, and so I had accounts Daniel knew nothing about, accounts Chelsea would never dream existed. I ran my fingers over the faded papers, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. For years I had stayed silent, letting them believe I was weak, letting them think they held all the power. But in truth, I held the one thing they valued most: money, property, security, the very things they were hoping to strip from me. I already controlled them without their knowledge. The next step was information, because revenge is never rushed. It is carved slowly, like a sculpture, each piece deliberate, each cut intentional. I began listening more carefully, watching their movements, noting their habits, their weaknesses. I paid attention to Chelsea's shopping sprees, the way she hid receipts in her purse, the late-night phone calls she took in the kitchen when she thought no one was awake. And Daniel, my son, my betrayer, I saw the stress in his eyes when bills arrived, the way he avoided phone calls from numbers he didn't recognize, the quiet arguments he and Chelsea thought I couldn't hear. It was then I realized, they weren't as secure as they pretended. They were drowning in debt, desperate for the money they believed they would inherit from me, eager to push me out so they could finally breathe again. And that, I thought, was where my leverage would be born. A week later, Chelsea tried again to provoke me. We're looking at retirement homes for you, something modern, something with professional care. You'll be happier there, she said sweetly, though her eyes betrayed her cruelty. Daniel nodded along, his hand resting on her shoulder like a puppet string, his silence as loud as her words. I only smiled, pretending to accept, pretending to be grateful, while inside I laughed, because every word they spoke was tightening the noose around their own necks. In the days that followed, I quietly reached out to an old friend, Margaret, a lawyer I had once trusted with smaller matters years ago. She was surprised to hear from me, surprised to learn I still had my wits, my sharpness, my will. And when I explained my situation, the betrayal, the cruelty, the way they were plotting to cast me aside, her eyes burned with fury on my behalf. You've come to the right person, she said. Let's make sure they never see this coming. Together, we crafted the first stages of my plan. I updated my will, removing Daniel entirely, leaving nothing to Chelsea, stripping them of the inheritance they were already salivating over. I funneled funds into accounts they could not touch, securing my future, locking away every cent where only I and Margaret had access. And then I went one step further. I drafted documents that would expose their debts, their lies, their cruelty, if they ever dared to cross the line. Every night I played the role of the obedient, unwanted mother, silent in the corner, invisible in their home. But behind closed doors, I was building a fortress, brick by brick, detail by detail, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash it. Then came the first test. Chelsea had planned a dinner party, a small gathering of her friends, the kind of people who lived for gossip and appearances. She told me not to embarrass her, not to speak too much, not to make myself too visible, as though I were a stain on her perfect picture. So I stayed quiet, serving drinks, clearing plates, while her friends laughed and complimented her, and Daniel beamed with pride. But when one of them casually asked about their finances, about the rumors of Daniel's struggling business, Chelsea's smile faltered, her laugh came too quickly, too forced, and Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes darting away. I said nothing, but I saw everything, the cracks in their perfect mask, the truth bleeding through. That night, as they argued in hushed whispers behind their bedroom door, I lay in bed, calm and steady, knowing my revenge was already beginning to bloom. They thought they were in control, but the truth was shifting inch by inch. And soon they would discover the cost of underestimating me. The day of reckoning began on a cold morning, when Chelsea barged into my room without knocking, waving a glossy brochure in my face. "Look at this, mother," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "This retirement home is perfect for you. They have nurses, activities, everything you could ever need." I looked at the brochure, at the smiling elderly faces plastered across the pages, and then I looked back at her smirk, and I felt a calm settle over me. It was time. I forced a smile, nodding as though I were grateful, as though I had accepted my fate. "It does look nice," I said softly. "When were you planning to send me there?" Her eyes lit up at my compliance, and she laughed, the cruel sound of victory echoing in the small room. "As soon as possible," she replied. "Daniel is making the arrangements. It's all for the best." I nodded again, pretending to agree, but inside I was steady, collected, because everything was ready, every piece of the puzzle in place. As soon as she left, I pulled out my phone and called Margaret, my lawyer, and whispered the words I had been waiting to say for weeks. "It's time," I told her. "Let's begin." That evening, Daniel came home earlier than usual, his face tense, his shoulders heavy. He avoided my eyes as he sat at the dining table, shuffling papers, pretending to be busy. I watched him for a moment, the boy I had raised, the man who had once clung to my hand as a child, now a stranger conspiring against me. My heart ached, but the ache only fueled my determination. I stood quietly, walked over, and placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of him. He looked up, surprised, his brow furrowing as he picked it up. "What's this?" he asked, his voice cautious. "Open it," I replied calmly. "It's something you should see before Chelsea pushes you any further." He tore it open, his eyes scanning the first page, and immediately his face paled. The papers were records, proof of his debts, and paid loans, and pending lawsuits that I had obtained through Margaret's careful digging. His lips parted, his hand trembling as he flipped through the pages, each one exposing the fragile foundation of the life he and Chelsea had built. How did you get this?" he stammered, his voice breaking. "A mother always knows," I replied quietly. "You thought I was blind, but I've seen everything." He leaned back in his chair, his face crumbling, and for the first time in years, I saw the boy in him again, lost, afraid, drowning. But before he could speak, Chelsea entered, her heels clicking against the floor, her voice sharp. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her eyes darting to the papers in Daniel's hands. He looked at her, then back at me, but before he could explain, I stepped forward, my voice steady. "It's over, Chelsea," I said. "I know everything. The debts, the lies, the way you've been planning to throw me away like trash." Her face flushed red, her eyes narrowing, but I didn't let her interrupt. "You thought I had nothing," I continued, "but I have more than you could ever imagine. And now, I have all the power." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound, though I could see the flicker of fear in her eyes. "You're bluffing," she spat. "You're just an old woman clinging to scraps." I reached into my bag and pulled out another envelope, this one thicker, heavier. I handed it to her, watching as she snatched it from my hand, tearing it open. Inside were copies of the updated will, legal documents, and evidence of their schemes, everything ready to expose them if they dared to act against me. Her hands shook as she read, her smirk fading, her confidence crumbling with every page. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I already did," I replied firmly. "And if you try to push me, if you so much as raise your voice at me again, this entire town will know who you really are." The silence that followed was thick, heavy, like the air before a storm. Daniel sat frozen, his face pale, his eyes darting between us, torn between his wife and his mother, and Chelsea, for the first time since I had known her, had nothing to say. I turned away, walking toward my room, my voice calm, but firm. "From this day forward," I said, "I am no longer your burden, I am your reckoning." And with that, I closed the door behind me, leaving them in the wreckage of their own making. That night, I slept peacefully. For the first time in months, their whispers echoed faintly through the walls. Thanksgiving was supposed to be about family, about gratitude, about remembering the people who mattered most. But that year, the air in my house felt heavy, almost hostile, like a storm cloud ready to break at any second. I looked around the table, the turkey steaming in the center, the mashed potatoes piled high, the cranberry sauce glistening under the warm light. but the warmth I craved wasn't there. My son Daniel sat at the head of the table, shoulders straight, chin lifted, like he was already the master of the house, and his wife Chelsea leaned close to him, her manicured fingers drumming against her glass of wine. I tried to smile. I tried to hold on to the illusion that we were still a family, but I could feel it. Something was different this year. Daniel didn't even look at me the way sons are supposed to look at their mothers, with kindness, with respect, with that tiny bit of tenderness that never fades no matter how old they get. Instead, his eyes slid past me like I was just another piece of old furniture cluttering the room. My heart tightened in my chest, and I reached for my glass of water with trembling hands. It had been 23 long years since I had lost my hearing, 23 years of silence, of watching lips move without truly knowing what was being said. I had learned to read faces, to guess moods, to survive in the quiet void. But now, thanks to the miracle of modern medicine, I had something no one expected. Not even Daniel, not even Chelsea. I had my hearing back, every sound sharp, every whisper clear, every cruel word now falling directly into my ears like daggers. I had chosen not to tell them, not yet. I wanted to see. I wanted to know who they were when they thought I was still trapped in silence, and what I heard that Thanksgiving night shattered me in ways I never thought possible. As the plates clattered and forks scraped against porcelain, Chelsea leaned toward Daniel, her lips moving with that careless arrogance only people who think they're safe can afford. Her voice slid across the table like venom, soft enough that she thought I couldn't possibly catch it. But I did. She's such a burden. Daniel, look at her shaking hands. She can barely hold a fork anymore. How much longer are we supposed to put up with this? My stomach dropped, and I froze, the fork halfway to my mouth, my hand trembling harder than before, not from age, but from fury. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't defend me. He didn't say she's my mother. She raised me. She sacrificed for me. No, he nodded, his lips curling into a thin, almost cruel smile. I know, Chelsea, he said, his tone flat, matter of fact, like we were talking about an old sofa that had to be thrown out. We'll have to figure out a way to move her out, maybe into a nursing home. My vision blurred with hot tears, but I forced myself not to react, not to flinch, not to give away that I had heard every poisoned word, because in that moment, I realized something. They thought I was powerless. They thought I was deaf. They thought they could whisper their wicked plans in front of me and I would never know. But I knew, oh I knew, and the fire that rose in my chest was hotter than anything I had ever felt in my life. I looked down at my plate, I stabbed at the turkey, and I chewed slowly, forcing myself to play the part of the helpless old woman who couldn't hear, who couldn't fight back. But inside, my mind was racing, my heart pounding with one clear thought. They will regret this. They will regret every word. Later that night, when the dishes were done and the house had gone quiet, I sat in my room, staring at the old photo on my nightstand. It was of Daniel as a little boy, maybe 7 years old, grinning wide with missing teeth, his arms wrapped around me after I had baked him his favorite chocolate cake for his birthday. My throat ached, my eyes burned, and I whispered to the photo even though he couldn't hear me. Where did you go, my son? Where did that little boy disappear? The one who used to say he'd take care of me when I got old. The photo gave me no answers, but my heart did. It told me that the boy I loved was gone, replaced by a man greedy enough, cold enough, to sell me out for comfort and money, and if that was the case, then I would stop being the helpless mother he thought I was. I would become something else entirely. I would become his worst mistake. The next morning began like any other, but something in the air felt colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the cruelty I had heard the night before. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, steam curling up toward my face, but no amount of warmth could ease the chill in my chest. Daniel walked in, his steps heavy, his eyes glued to his phone, and he didn't even bother to greet me. He poured himself coffee, black and quick, like a man in a rush, and I waited, hoping for one shred of tenderness, but it never came. Then, Chelsea appeared, her perfume flooding the room, her heels clicking against the floor like a drumbeat of disdain. She looked me up and down, her lips curling into that fake smile she used when strangers were around, but today, with no audience, she didn't bother pretending. You didn't fold the laundry yesterday, she said flatly, her tone sharp. I had to do it myself, and I don't appreciate being treated like a maid in my own house. my fingers tightened around the cup, and I swallowed, the anger burning at the back of my throat. I wanted to scream, to remind her this was my house, my money, my life she was standing in, but I held my tongue. I forced my face to remain neutral, the picture of silence, of weakness, because my plan needed time, my revenge needed patience. Daniel didn't say a word in my defense. He just scrolled through his phone, sipping his coffee like Chelsea's words were gospel. His silence was worse than her insults, because it told me everything. It told me he had already chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. Later that week, the betrayal deepened. I had spent the afternoon baking an apple pie, the kind Daniel used to beg me for when he was a boy, the smell filling the kitchen, warm and sweet. I thought, foolishly, maybe this would stir something in him, maybe the taste of his childhood would remind him of who I was, what I had done for him. But when I placed the pie on the counter, Chelsea wrinkled her nose and laughed. You know Daniel doesn't even like sweets anymore. You wasted your time. Maybe you should save your energy. You're not as young as you used to be. My hands shook as I sliced the pie, my throat tight with unshed tears, but I forced myself to smile weakly, as though I hadn't heard the cruelty laced in her words. Daniel didn't even taste it. He kissed Chelsea on the cheek, grabbed his keys, and the two of them left together, leaving me alone at the table with the pie untouched. I sat there for hours, staring at the empty chairs, the uneaten slices, and something inside me hardened like stone. The boy I raised was gone. The man in his place saw me as nothing more than a burden, and the woman he married wanted me erased from their perfect little picture. And if that was what they wanted, then I would give them something else entirely. I would give them a reason to regret every cruel word, every cold glance, every moment of neglect. Over the next few weeks, the cruelty escalated. Chelsea began dropping hints, loud enough for Daniel to hear, sharp enough for me to feel. This house is too small for all of us, she would sigh, flipping through home design magazines. We need more space, somewhere quieter, maybe just the two of us. And Daniel, my own flesh and blood, would nod, his lips tightening, his eyes flicking toward me like I was already packed and gone. They stopped inviting me to family dinners. They stopped including me in conversations, and they began to speak openly about nursing homes, about retirement facilities, about shipping me off like an unwanted package. I heard it all. Every plan, every whisper, and each one cut deeper than the last. But I stayed silent. I played my role, the deaf old woman who had no clue, no power, no voice. And in the quiet of my room, when the nights grew long and the house fell still, I began to plan. I pulled out old documents, old accounts, old secrets I had guarded for years, the kind of secrets Daniel and Chelsea had no idea existed. And with each passing day, my plan grew sharper, my resolve stronger, my heart colder. One evening, I overheard the final blow. Chelsea's voice drifted from the living room, her tone mocking, dripping with disdain. She's just dead weight, Daniel. She doesn't even know what's going on half the time. Once she's gone, we can finally live our lives. We can travel. We can be free. And Daniel's answer, the words that killed the last fragile thread of love in me, came without hesitation. You're right, Chelsea. I'll start looking into homes tomorrow. My chest ached, my eyes stung, but this time, there were no tears, no trembling, only a strange calm that settled over me like a cloak, because in that moment, I knew the time for patience was ending, and the time for revenge was beginning. They thought they had stripped me of everything, but they had no idea of the storm they had unleashed. Desperate, broken, searching for a way out of the mess they had created. But I no longer cared, because the balance had shifted, the power had returned, and my revenge was only just beginning. The days that followed were strangely quiet, almost too quiet, like the air before a thunderstorm. Daniel avoided me, slipping out early for work and returning late at night, his face drawn and pale. Chelsea, on the other hand, tried to regain her usual bravado, but I could see the cracks, the way her hands shook whenever I caught her eye. I pretended not to notice, going about my routine as if nothing had happened, but inside, I was calm, steady, because my revenge was not finished yet. They had tried to break me, to discard me like a broken object, and now it was time for the world to see who they really were. Margaret, my lawyer, came to the house one morning with a thick folder in her hand. She sat with me at the kitchen table, her eyes sharp, her voice low as she explained the final step. The documents are ready, she said. All we need is your word to move forward. I looked down at the folder, at the pile of evidence we had gathered, proof of their debts, their schemes, their betrayal. My hand rested on the cover for a moment, and then I nodded slowly. Do it, I whispered. Let the truth come out. That evening, Daniel and Chelsea returned home to find Margaret sitting in the living room, her briefcase open, the documents spread across the coffee table. They froze in the doorway, shock flashing across their faces. What is this? Chelsea demanded, her voice trembling though she tried to sound confident. Margaret didn't answer. She simply slid a stack of papers toward them, her expression unreadable. Your creditors will be very interested in these, she said coldly, and so will the court. Daniel sank into the nearest chair, his face buried in his hands. Chelsea grabbed the papers, flipping through them wildly, her voice rising in panic. This isn't fair, she cried. You can't do this to us. You're supposed to be family. I stepped forward then, my voice calm but strong, the voice of a woman who had finally reclaimed her dignity. Family? I asked softly. Was I family to you when you laughed at me, when you called me useless, when you tried to throw me out of my own son's house? Her face reddened, but she had no answer, no excuse that could erase the truth. I turned to Daniel, my son, the boy I had raised, the man who had betrayed me. I gave you everything, I said, my voice breaking slightly, my time, my love, my sacrifices, and this is how you repaid me. He looked up, tears glistening in his eyes, but for once, I felt nothing, no pity, no desire to shield him from the consequences of his choices. Because this was his doing, his betrayal, and he had to face it. Margaret gathered the papers and stood, her tone brisk, professional. You will both receive official notice within the week, she said. I suggest you prepare yourselves. With that, she left, and the silence that followed was suffocating, heavy with the weight of their downfall. I walked to my room, closing the door behind me, and for the first time in years, I smiled. It wasn't a cruel smile. It wasn't gloating. It was the smile of a woman who had finally taken back her power. In the weeks that followed, the truth came out, piece by piece, like shards of glass cutting through the lies they had built. The creditors came knocking, the lawsuits began, and suddenly, Daniel and Chelsea were no longer the confident couple who had mocked me. They were small, fragile, desperate, clinging to each other as the world around them crumbled. And I, the woman they had tried to discard, walked away with my head held high. I moved into my own apartment, a cozy little place, with sunlight streaming through the windows and flowers on the balcony. It wasn't grand, it wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and it was filled with peace. Sometimes, late at night, I thought of Daniel, of the boy he had once been, and my heart ached for the son I had lost. But then I remembered the woman who had stood in front of me, who had called me useless, who had tried to erase me from my own family, and I knew I had done the right thing. My revenge wasn't about destroying them. It wasn't about cruelty. It was about balance, about showing them that I was not weak, that I would never be discarded, and in that balance, I found peace.